Welcome to my presentation. Today, we will be exploring the institutional racism within our nation's healthcare system. So, what is institutional racism? Institutional racism is a form of racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization. It can lead to such issues as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, political power, education, many other issues. But the main issue we'll be talking about today is institutional racism in healthcare. So that leads us to the big question of the day. How does institutional racism affect the quality of health care of minorities in America? So, as we're going through these slides, I really want you to think back to that question. Just really think back to it. So, I just wanted to get the idea out of the way that the majority of racism is intentional. Like I said before, institutional racism is embedded into today's society as normal practice. So if there's anyone to blame, it's people long before us, people who really set the foundation for our society long ago. So we all know what happened back then, and racism still affects us today. It's just not as in your face, not as obvious, not as there. So since it's more normalized now, it's it's really unintentional. So yes, so pretty much in today's society, discrimination is not intentional. Discriminatory behavior is unconscious, unthinking, and unintentional. Biased beliefs can occur without conscious awareness, even by persons who do not endorse racist beliefs. So really, it's pretty much saying, the slide is pretty much saying, just because you're not racist doesn't mean you don't have those beliefs embedded into your brain. And I'm not saying you, the viewer, specifically, I'm just saying people in general. So, research has long indicated that poor persons and racial minorities are not viewed as desirable patients. Healthcare providers deliver inferior care to persons of low socioeconomic standing. But there's laws to make sure everyone has equal access to healthcare, right? Correct. But this is not an equality issue. It's an equity issue. So what is equity? Equity is the quality of being fair and impartial. So let's look at this picture. I know it's kind of blurry, but on the left we have equality. On the right we have equity. So let's look at the difference. We have the guy on the left, he's kind of average sized. The guy in the middle, he's tall. And the guy to the right, he's short. And they're all trying to reach, they all have the same goal, but they're all given the same size box. So, although, yes, it's equal, you gave them equally sized boxes, they are still not able to achieve their goal, which would be, of course, grabbing the apple. So, that would be a good example of equality. And yes, our society has equality. Everyone's pretty much treated equal. It's written into our laws that things are equal. But when we look at equity, we see the tall guy over here on the left, the average guy in the middle, and the short guy on the right. So let's evaluate what they're standing on. So the tall guy only has one box because that's all he needs to reach his goals. The average guy has a box and like a smaller box, and that's all he needs to reach his goals. But the shorter guy over here has one big box and two small boxes. But they're all on a common ground. They're all reaching the same goal. They're all able to reach it. So when I say this is an equity issue, I mean it in a way that people in low socioeconomic statuses may have an equal access to health care as people in upper socioeconomic classes, which this idea can be described as equality, which is shown on the left. So you can understand how just because it's equal doesn't quite mean it's as desirable, reachable. It's often out of reach. So you can look at the short guy as a poor minority. Just certain things, necessities like healthcare, can just be so out of reach for minorities. And that's where we can see this institutional racism. So, anyway, in other words, yes, these rich white people, typically white, yes, majority white, are being given the same health care as people of lower socioeconomic status. When I say the same health care, I am talking about bills. So when people of low socioeconomic status need medical care, they often can't go or have to go to a doctor of lower quality. On the other hand, the equity in our system is not being met. Why are people in completely different socioeconomic statuses being charged the same amount, or often more, due to the fact that they don't have a good enough job to have health insurance good enough to cover their medical costs for quality health care? Because the better the quality, the more expensive, right? So when you look at the bigger picture, you will notice that persons in low socioeconomic statuses are typically our people of color, while people with higher socioeconomic statuses are typically white, and this is where race comes in. So in our next slide, we're going to look at the infant mortality rate of Black unborn babies. So can you guess what that would be? Because I did not. You're going to be blown away by this number. 11%. 11% is the mortality rate of Black unborn babies. So what about white babies? So the mortality rate of non-Hispanic white babies is 4.7%. That is less than half of the mortality rate of non-Hispanic Black babies. So, and then when we look at all races, we have 6%. So you compare white to races as a whole, and you see that white people are still surviving at a better rate, even as babies. And that's the crazy part. So let's talk about maternal mortality rate. That is 41%. So we look at white women, that's about 13%. American Indian, Alaskan Native women, 30%. And then, of course, Black women, 41%. So here we can clearly see how white people almost always have access to quality healthcare, have such easier reachable access. And That's where the equity comes in. So I want you to pause the lecture and look up chickenpox, eczema, and psoriasis. So I want you to notice how in your Google search, the majority of example of these common skin conditions are being demonstrated by white patients. Do you see the problem? This isn't just a Google thing. It's an education breach in healthcare. Doctors often are trained on what diseases as simple as the one listed look like on white people. This is one of the many factors on why people of color's conditions are often overlooked in the medical field. So, where is the system broken? Yes. So, let me just summarize it for you. So, the system has a tendency to project values and provide services that meet the needs of the majority while not fully recognizing the needs of the minority. So, in conclusion, there are many more factors within the healthcare industry that clearly show institutional racism, but since institutional racism is defined as normalized, it takes big changes in perspective to start recognizing these types of things.